but I'd like to welcome you all to our March presentation. Should be a great one today. I'm Ray Riddell, the president of the Saint John Naturalists Club, and just want to say at the outset that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Woolastook, Maliseet, Mi'kmaq, Passamaquoddy nations who signed peace and friendship treaties with the British Crown in the 1700s. Want to assure you that lots has happened since we last met. The club executive's working very hard for its members. I'd like to mention Vicki Cowan, our vice president, Laurie McGovern, our treasurer, Julie Bauer, our secretary, and Chuck Perry, our past president. There is a lot of work involved in getting things organized, and my hat's off to them for putting in the time and the effort. Our committees are also working very hard, handling our 7 major projects. Mary Solos, the program committee, of course, working on the summer activities. Jim Wilson at PLBO and the monarch tagging project. And of course, Hank Scarth with the Greenlaw and Shorebird projects. Our bulletin goes out every 2 months. Thank you, Jan Riddell, for preparation of the last one. Charles Graves is preparing one for May and June. So if you have any suggestions or for content or submissions, please let him know or me. Couple of highlights. Exciting news, actually, that the PLBO has secured funding of around $9,900 for a program coordinator for the wildlife, from the Wildlife Trust Fund for PLBO. Also has secured some funding and signed a contract with Ducks Unlimited for around $8,000 to fund our 2 official counters. So that's really, really excellent news. Greenlaw has secured funding from the Wildlife Trust Fund for $8,500 for an official counter and a small amount for a coordinator. Mark on your calendars June 3rd, 4th, 5th. That's the Festival of Nature is coming up. That'll be in Fredericton and Sunbury County. I'd like to make special mention of Morgan Bell, who's our journalism student, who's joining our team actually to get the word out and give us the benefit of her professional expertise. She just visited the museum, is working on a booklet, history of the club. I just want to mention that, I didn't realize that the funding applications take a lot of work by our volunteers. Jim Wilson, Julie, Vicki, and Hank put in a lot of effort to obtain the money, make the submission, negotiate the contracts, which are quite extensive, and administering the programs and submitting final reports. So a lot of work goes unrecognized there. They really are unsung heroes. I'd like to also mention the Wildlife Trust Fund, who have been instrumental in providing us funding for 2 projects this year, and they've been very supportive over the years. What you can do to help is purchase the conservation plate, and that conservation plate is available when you buy a new car. But you have to pick one of the plates, and you'll pay an extra $7 a year, which goes to that fund and is administered by a group of volunteers. A number of our members have been volunteering on that committee. It's a 3-year term. They're still looking for people for the next 3 years. So if you have an inkling, let me know. I want to mention too that the program committee is working on an outing, really exciting outing, actually, from Brundage Point. Mark your calendars, April 23rd. April 23rd from 9 till about 2, we'll be learning about the different apps available for plant bird identification, and we'll be able to practice with them out on the new Nature Trust Preserve out here in Grand Bay. If you're not getting the bulletin, let me know. Following the presentation by Todd today, this is a bit of a special meeting because normally we don't do business at these meetings anymore. We put everything in the bulletin. But for this particular meeting, once Todd has completed his excellent presentation, I would ask all our members to stay online because there'll be a presentation of PLBO, that's Point Lepreau Bird Observatory plan by Jim Wilson, which we'll have a motion to adopt that plan and hopefully a second and approval. And also Jim will be presenting the PLBO budget. As you know, there are 3 budgets throughout the year. One is for the observatory, one is for the club, and one is for Greenlaw. So today we'll be looking at that budget. We have a motion, a second, and hopefully approval. So please stay tuned. Be aware that only members can vote. I mean, non-members can stay around and watch the activity, but only members can vote. And so with that in mind, I hand you over to Mary Solos. Mary?
Thank you, Ray. Good morning, everyone. So before I introduce our guest speaker, I'd just like to remind everyone to type in your questions into the chat, and then Todd will answer those at the end of his presentation. Many of us already know Todd Watts from his work over the past years as a naturalist. His career began when he founded the Greenlaw Mountain Hawk Watch, where he continues to collect data every autumn. Todd has worked 5 seasons aboard the Quaddy Link, a St. Andrews-based whale watching boat. He spent 6 seasons as the dedicated observer at the Point Lepreau Bird Observatory, and 6 seasons as a dedicated observer at the Point, and 6 seasons working with a New Brunswick-based environmental consultant. Since 2018, Todd has worked for the Peskotomukati at Skutik, searching the land for species at risk and areas of ecological significance within the traditional territory. And this includes the watersheds of the Skutik, or the St. Croix River, as well as the Digdeguash, Magadevic, Pocologan, Lepreau, and New Rivers. Through his work, Todd has had the opportunity to observe the state of the land in a way that few people do. So right now, I'd like to welcome Todd Watts. And Todd, I'll let you take over the microphone and share your screen now. Thanks.
Let's see. Here we go. I think we're set up. So as Mary was saying, I've been working for the Peskotomukati since 2018, spending a significant amount of time out on the land looking for species at risk and anything of ecological significance. It's a rather large territory extending from the US border all the way to Point Lepreau. Historically, the territory of the Peskotomukati, or Passamaquoddy, would have extended well into the state of Maine as well. So it's a big territory. I spend much of the time in the far southwestern corner in the Skutik drainage, or St. Croix drainage. That watershed has turned out to be quite an interesting place, very rich with a variety of plants and animals, many that aren't found in other parts of New Brunswick or maybe even other parts of Canada. It's my job to get out there and find them the best I can. I like to think that I'm developing pretty solid skills at doing such things, and I've certainly had a fair amount of success over the years. Last 4 years, going into 5th year now. I presented this slideshow once before, and some folks had questions about the first slide. So this is not a slide showing my backpack. This is a slide showing this rather large white pine, which is over 5 feet in diameter. Very, very old tree. In the vicinity of this tree, there were several other trees of somewhat similar size, which is a rare find anywhere in New Brunswick. And this will be one of the points that I wish to make in this presentation, and that is that the state of the land is not what it could be. Really, the state of the land, in my opinion, educated opinion, is poor in general. Even though the Skutik drainage and other portions of it are rather special, unique, with species at risk, large trees in just a few places, some old forest, it really is in poor shape. And I will try to explain why without getting too depressing. So here's a map showing a big chunk of the historical territory of the Peskotomukati, the folks that I work for. As Mary mentioned, it includes the drainages from the Skutik or St. Croix all the way over east to the Lepreau. So that goes way back inland all the way to, say, like the Skutik Lake protected natural area, and even a little beyond. Portions of this include the fog belt, which is a bit important for some of the work that I've been doing. Some species at risk in this corner of New Brunswick are lichen, and some of them tend to occur in the fog belt, which extends along the Fundy coast. There's also some areas of the territory where there's very, very heavy forest industry impacts. I'll have some slides later on that will document some of that. Now we'll jump into a little bit about the species at risk that are present, that I know of down in this corner of the province, largely Charlotte County. Lots of birds, 24 species of birds, and quite a few of them actually breed right in this portion of the province. A few just stop over in migration, but many breed here. 6 mammals, 5 reptiles, 16 fish, 8 insects. Vascular plants, I believe that should actually be 5 or 6 species, not 4. 7 lichen, and if we were to really study lichen in depth, we might want to increase that number a little bit for a number of reasons. And if I have time, I'll try to get into that. And a couple species of mollusks. Oh, I should mention, species at risk means that they are at risk of extinction. It's not that they're at risk of population decline or just experiencing population decline. They are at risk of disappearing from this area or the planet. So avian species at risk, there is quite a list. Again, I believe it was 24 species that I felt occur with some regularity in this portion of the province. I've only had an opportunity to work with a few of them, really to much degree. I've spent quite a bit amount of time working with Canada Warbler, documenting them in the wettest areas, wettest woodlands of this southwestern portion of the province. Olivesided Flycatcher, rusty Blackbird have also received a significant amount of attention from me. I've also looked for bobolink and bank swallow and a few of the others. Attempt in the middle of the night last year for yellow rail, but the highlighted species here where I spent the bulk of my time so far. You should note perhaps before moving on to the next slide that of these 24 species, 7, roughly less than 1/3, are aerial insectivores. Aerial insectivores are not doing well at all. So the Canada Warbler, which I have worked with extensively, mostly in the Skutik drainage, it's been listed as threatened, I believe, recently downlisted to special concern. It can be quite abundant in the Skutik drainage. I have documented as many as 26 in the morning in rather low-lying woodlands, wet areas, cedar, black ash, red maple swamps. In those areas, when you find appropriate habitat, the Canada Warbler can be the most abundant warbler species present. Again, it is a dweller of wet forest, spends much of its time in the understory, and that's why it has this rather large eye that you might note in the photograph here. This image here shows rather typical Canada Warbler habitat. semi-open with a very thick shrub layer, lots of ferns and mosses on a complex ground structure. So the ground is generally not very flat and prime habitat for Canada warbler. It nests on clumps of ferns, upturned roots of fallen trees, and it'll utilize song perches at different heights, generally in the subcanopy, for singing during the breeding season. That would be males trying to attract a mate or letting other males know not to venture too close. Olivesided flycatcher is another at-risk species currently listed as threatened. It spent a significant amount of time looking for this bird down in this corner of the province. In my first season, I think I only documented one or maybe two, and it was very, very disappointing. I'm not sure why that was. I was very familiar with the species. I knew its habitat, its songs, and how to recognize it if I were lucky enough to actually see one, but I had only encountered one or two for unknown reasons. Perhaps it was just a bad year for olive-sided flycatcher. Fortunately, in the last couple of seasons, I've documented a fair number, half a dozen or more. So there certainly are present. And I suspect that if I was getting out onto more habitat, I would see even more of these birds. Unlike Canada warbler, they occupy a very, very large area. Canada warbler will occupy something like a half a hectare of land. That would be its territory in the breeding season. Olive-sided flycatcher would be tens of hectares or its territory. So much more spread out. I was going to say a little more difficult to find, but that depends on how you define difficult to find. They're very, very vocal, so hearing them is usually pretty easy. I've detected them from over a kilometer away, singing their quick 3 beers song. They're an aerial insectivore. Declines for this bird are likely due in part to the loss of insect populations. So this image here shows typical olive-sided flycatcher habitat. Generally softwoods, coniferous trees, bogs, bog edges, swamps. You can find quite a few of them actually in the swamps, at least venturing into the swampland areas to feed. Sometimes I found them singing overhead towards the edges of the swamps. They nest high up in coniferous spruce trees, typically near the end of a branch. Also work with rusty, attempted to find rusty blackbird, another species at risk. This bird, at least in this portion of the province, is not doing very well. Very, very hard to find. I'm lucky if I find more than one or two in the breeding season. At one point in time, they would have been fairly common down here, if not abundant, I think, if we went back far enough. I believe they're being largely outcompeted by common grackles, which might be due to climate change. Good note, I suppose, that the name rusty blackbird comes from rusty color that these birds have during the winter months. So we've got some turtles that are at risk down here too. Wood turtle, snapping turtle, eastern painted turtle. All three of these can be found relatively easily, especially snapping turtles and eastern painted turtles. They're still pretty abundant. Wood turtles, locating a wood turtle requires can require significant effort, or maybe you just get lucky. Best time to see them is in the spring when they're quite near the water, maybe sunning on a bank. So I have some images here of the upper and lower sides of a wood turtle. Both images are of an animal that's quite wet, so that has an effect on its appearance. On the underside, there's a very distinct pattern. It makes this species very identifiable. I've often wondered if this pattern might be like a pattern on the tail of a humpback whale or a fingerprint of a human, that each one is to be unique to that individual. I haven't done any research to see if that's actually the case. I wouldn't be at all surprised if other folks have. Here's another wood turtle on dry land. This image and the last two were captured in the Skutik River drainage, where there is a population of wood turtle. So amongst the vascular plants, one of the species at risk is the black ash. The black ash, in my opinion, is a very important species, especially in the Skutik drainage. And it looks like we're probably going to lose this species to the emerald ash borer. The emerald ash borer takes out this species. It could have quite an impact on other at-risk species in the drainage, in particular, several lichen species that tend to favor black ash. Yeah, so that's it. We're likely to see quite a few ash disappear. It is a very common species. When you get into the wooded wetlands of the Skutik drainage, you'll find it in mixed wood wetlands and right in cedar wetlands, and sometimes it'll actually dominate in a black ash wetland. These wetlands are where you would find Canada warbler along with some of the at-risk lichen species. So for at-risk lichen species, there's a bunch. I've worked mostly with a bit with Bluefelt lichen, quite a bit with white rim shingle lichen, wrinkled shingle lichen. I've thrown in long bearded jelly skin here, Leptogium hirsutum, which in my opinion should be added to the list, and perhaps will be if the right folks I suppose get involved in that. It is a species that doesn't occur in very many places in New Brunswick or in Canada as a whole. So the white rimmed shingle lichen, or Fuscopinaria leucosticta, was the first lichen species that I began to work with. I believe it's currently listed as threatened. A year and a half ago, I received a bit of training on lichen identification from Ken Driscoll in the New Brunswick Museum. I have to say, at first it was very intimidating. I thought, well, there's no way I can do this. There's species or lichen species, many of them are just too similar. Well, it turned out that I can do it, and it seems I've actually been able to do it quite well to my surprise. I've been able to document this species and a few others in abundance. So on the left here, we have a small specimen on a cedar tree, this left image, and then the right image shows a large colony extending up a leaning cedar. This leaning cedar is leaning towards the sun, creating a shader, more moist side for the lichen to inhabit, and that's the favorite habitat of this lichen species, is on the say the northeast side in particular of a leaning host. Generally, almost always, in my experience in Skutik drainage, a white cedar, eastern white cedar. I think I've only found it one other occasion on another species that happened to be a black ash, which is also at risk, as I was just addressing. So here's another image of a host, host for white rim shingle lichen, another cedar that's leaning. This one, I believe, is leaning west. So what we're looking at is probably the north side of the tree, and that's where the colony extends. This is dark material on the tree would be white rim shingle lichen, as well as some other lichens. It's rare that just one species of lichen would be found on a single host. It's usually quite an abundance, diversity, I should say, of species. This might be a good time to mention one of the threats to lichens, and that is the drying effect from cutting. White rim shingle lichen appears to be very much old growth dependent. When I find it, it's almost always in the oldest, most notable stands of cedar that I encounter. If I'm in a stand of cedar and I suddenly find a section with larger, much older trees, more widespread with little understory, that's where I find white rim shingle lichen. Many of these areas aren't protected. They're not wetlands. They're on the border of wetlands within the buffer or well outside of the very tiny buffer that we have right now, a buffer of 20 meters, which in my opinion should be extended to 100, 200, 300 or more meters in order to protect this species and several others. So it's at risk. If you cut up to within a certain distance of this habitat, you will dry it out and then likely eliminate or degrade habitat for white rim shingle lichen, as well as a number of other lichen species. It's also threatened by air pollution, acid rain, and climate change. So this species is certainly at risk. It'd be great to see its habitat recovered because white rim shingle lichen habitat is quite beautiful. Wrinkled shingle lichen is another species that I've worked with quite extensively, and I've documented this species in great abundance in the Skutik drainage. There's quite a few occurrences of it, and as my work progresses, I'm seeing the number of occurrences are likely to diminish as they goes from scattered occurrences to basically just one large population covering much of the drainage. This occurs in the wettest of areas, in cedar swamps, black ash swamps, red maple swamps, and mixed wood swamps. The left image shows the shingle lichen, wrinkled shingle lichen, Veneria lorida, rather dry. Looks generally has kind of a grayish color with brownish tones towards the center. And then the right image is a bit wet, taking on a darker color, showing some of the underlying layers of the lichen body. Image here shows a wrinkled shingle lichen habitat. Some might note right away, this looks like Canada warbler habitat. Well, it is. It's prime Canada warbler habitat. Habitat that even though it's wetlands, I still see being cut. This species here, it tends to occur mostly on black ash. I forget where my work is at right now when it comes to the numbers, but I believe it occurs on roughly 80% of the occurrences I've documented have been on black ash. Next in line would be red maple. I've also found it on cedar on a couple of occasions, but at least 8 times out of 10 is on black ash. So even if this species weren't threatened by other aspects of habitat loss, climate change, the loss of black ash would be a very serious threat to Veneria lorida. Bluefelt lichen is another lichen species that I've worked with a little bit, not as extensively as the other two. I'm determined to find it here in coastal Charlotte County. Historically, it did occur. The last population that I know of, probably that anybody knows of, I believe was in the Dipper Harbor area. Unfortunately, that area has been cut, and neighboring habitats that were appropriate for this species have also been cut. There is a very, very small unhealthy population out on Grand Manan that is still in existence. I visited that last week and made a brief attempt to find new populations. Unfortunately, I was unsuccessful, but I have a number of target areas that are on my list, and I'm still hopeful that I can find this species and maybe find some way to protect what's left of its habitat, which is disappearing very, very rapidly. It's a very, very, it's a rather distinct species, very, very different than many others in that the valley or body of the lichen is rather thick. which helps to make it a little more identifiable in the field, and it tends to stand out a little bit more than some of the other at-risk species that I've worked with. It's a little more unique and identifiable, which might be notable in the next image that I'm going to share here. So this is a number of colonies on a white cedar, not too far from Saint John. Perhaps it's worth noting that the habitat for this species is very similar, at least in some cases, if not identical, to the white-rimmed shingle lichen, Peskotomukati, Lucas dicta, that I mentioned earlier. That's all I have for lichen for now. Talk a little bit about big trees and old forests, which is also part of the work that I'm doing, trying to find these old stands of trees wherever, whenever they occur, in order to document their presence, because they have significant ecological value. As I've mentioned, they tend to host a number of species at risk. So there is old forest in Charlotte County. Unfortunately, as best I can tell, it only exists in very isolated, usually very small, very narrow stands, typically just an acre or two in size, maybe 5 or 10 if you're extremely lucky to find something like that. And more often than not, it's just a narrow strip along a water course or some other wetland, a so-called buffer. Legacy trees, such as the large white pine in my opening slide, are fairly common, left behind for various reasons, sometimes because it's just too large to deal with. So finding big trees isn't too hard, but finding old forest, true old forest, is a bit of a challenge. These are a couple of large trees that I did come across in the last few years. The left image shows a white pine that is about 4 feet in diameter at breast height, quite a good sized tree. The scales on the bark scales of this tree were probably about 15 inches long and about 2 inches thick. So quite an impressive old tree. The image on the right shows, I believe that's showing an eastern hemlock that I found out near Loon Bay. In this area where I found this one, there were 2 or 3 that were a little over 30 inches in diameter. So quite a good size eastern hemlock. Out along the Skutik drainage, or within the drainage, the watershed, there's quite a few hemlock, but it's rare that I come across one that's 30 inches or more in diameter. So within the drainage, not only are there endangered species, but there are endangered ecosystems. Cedar stands would be one, various types of cedar stands. Cedar is a target species for the timber products industry, disappearing very rapidly in this part of the world. I'll often find stands on satellite imagery that I pour through almost on a daily basis. I'll get into the field, I'll go out there, I'll be all excited that there's this great stand of cedar, only to find stumps that goes for as far as I can see. Old growth forest in general is an endangered ecosystem. We have in Charlotte County, I could only guess that it's less than 1% of old growth forest still exists. It's just gone. It's been cut over and over and over again. Then in riparian zones, I'd have to say riparian zones are endangered ecosystems. We have some buffers that are in place. You know, the DNR has buffers on what you can and cannot do, saying what you can and cannot do next to a river, but these buffers are small. And often you can get permits that allow you to cut right to river's edge and eliminate all habitat for just about any native creature. So riparian zones are very much in danger as well, and extremely important. So we can talk a bit about habitat loss. In this portion of the province, forestry, unfortunately, is the main cause of habitat loss. Anybody that wants to see what's going on doesn't have to go any further than Google Maps. You click on Google Maps, look at a satellite imagery, and you can see what's occurring. With a little bit of practice looking at such imagery, you can learn to pick out truly old forest stands of different ages. Of course, very easily recognize recent clear cuts such as we have in this image. This image shows a clear cut less than a kilometer from where I am right now. Right down the center of it is just an amazing stand of old forest. It's a mixedwood forest in there, deep mossy ground cover with a tiny water course running down the middle of it. Some of the areas that were cleared adjacent to this were also very impressive old forest. I didn't know about it until it was cleared, and I drove my truck down that forestry road and encountered that strip of old forest in the center. So there's some patches of forest out there, but disappearing rather quickly. By the way, forestry, as it's often defined as I research it, is the science and craft of creating, managing, planting, using, conserving, repairing forests, woodlands, and associated resources for human and environmental benefits. I'm not so sure that the way it's practiced today actually fits that description. So here's a slide of what forestry often looks like. It's pretty depressing. Look pretty much right to the horizon and see nothing but a flattened landscape. It's largely a dead zone. Everything that lived in the forest is pretty much gone. Even the microbes that live in the soil have been degraded. Not much left. Other image of forestry, basically the same thing. How many species can we think of that can live in that place? How many birds would live there? Insects? It's not much. And it'll take quite a few years, centuries, maybe longer for that to fully regenerate. So buffers, I've mentioned buffers before. Buffers are really important, and I think buffers right now deserve a lot of attention. Our current buffers are tiny. I believe the current size when cutting next to water courses is 20, and wetlands is 20 meters, 60 feet. It's nothing. Really does little to hold back sediments. It does nothing to prevent blowdown within the protected area. It does nothing really to prevent drying of those buffer zones around water courses. So this is an image of what happens often within buffers. When you clear neighboring lands of all trees, the wind speeds increase. They slam into the remaining forest, and you end up with quite a bit of windfall, as we have in this image right here. This image was taken at the last place in Charlotte County, coastal Charlotte County, that hosted Bluefelt lichen. Bluefelt lichen, which has been pretty much extirpated. All right, so views from above. Views from above are what I use to identify target areas for my work, whether I'm looking for Canada warbler habitat for other species of risk, such as lichen, or looking for old forest. It really tells a lot. You can look at this image here and get a good idea of the state of the land. It's a little bit like a piece of Swiss cheese. There are forestry roads cutting through it at all possible angles. Basically, the forest is in a state of regeneration throughout, with just some indications of some good mature, relatively old forest along some of the water courses. Looking at the image, you might also notice that some of the water bodies don't have any visible buffer. That's how small these buffers are. You can't see them. Looking at it with satellite imagery, 20-meter buffer is nothing. And I think this really puts it all into scale and shows how insignificant these buffers really are. and how those buffer sites need to be changed and need to be enlarged dramatically. All right, more views from above. Documenting again how fragmented the forest is. This image here is taken in the Skutik drainage where I work. Of course, lighter areas are areas that have been recently cleared. The darkest of the areas are often the oldest forest, but not necessarily. It'd be a little trickier than that to find the old forest. I mentioned riparian zones earlier. Development can be one of the threats to riparian zone. This image here is taken on the Magadevic near the St. George, where there's been quite a bit of development over recent years. And as you can see here, a number of parcels, the habitat at water's edge is being eliminated. There's hardly a tree left standing. There's another shot on the Magadevic. On the left side is a park, which is wooded. On the right side is a residential area. Owners of these lots have cut everything right to water's edge. So I've been going on a bit about the devastation that's occurring. In my mind, really saving wild things and ecosystems all comes down to respecting the land. It's as simple as that. We respect the land, we treat it properly, just the way we treat our family and friends. Treat it with respect. Give it what it needs. Make sure it's doing okay. Get in with some suggestions of what responsible land use might be. Don't want to go too deeply into this, so just throw them up there as examples, and perhaps we can move on. Maybe some folks have some questions. Certainly hoping that there are some questions. Run through this rather quickly and only skimmed at the surface of some of the work I've done over the last few years. So I thank everyone for participating today, and I look forward to hearing some questions.
Thank you, Todd. So if anyone has any questions, you can type them into the chat. I do see one question here from Vicky. She was asking, can you speak about the benefits of lichen?
Well, the benefits of lichen. I am not a lichenologist. Maybe I should start off with that. I'm not a lichenologist. I've developed some expertise with documenting several species. I've come to know their habitat preferences quite well, but I'm not a lichenologist. I have not studied lichen for very long, and I only know a small number of species. I can say that lichen can be indicators of old forest. I see that in my work almost every time I'm in the field. Certain species in particular tend to represent or occur in old forest. So when you see them, you know you're getting into an old stand. There are some organisms that feed on lichen. I believe lichen can also help to break down things in the forest, but again, I don't have any expertise in that, so I don't want to say anything more than I just have, because I might be incorrect in what I say.
Okay, another question here from Ray. What is done with the data you collect?
I try to share the data as broadly as I can. For the first year or so, I largely sat on it as I was getting a feel for the area and thinking about what I could do with the data. It is being used currently in part of the Target 1 process, which is going on throughout Canada. That's where protected natural areas and other areas are being established in order to set aside important ecosystems. So I share it with the Atlantic Canada Conservation Data Center, with DNR, and just about anybody else that's willing to look at it. Some of my data is recently contributed to a couple of Cozy Wick studies. So it's out there. It's being looked at more and more as years go by.
Awesome. Another question here from Mary. Have you had the opportunity to investigate mosses, general invertebrates, and fungi with respect to species at risk?
No, I have not.
Okay. Another question. Do you use iNaturalist? Susan is asking, how well can the iNaturalist app identify lichens?
I suspect that iNaturalist would, I don't use iNaturalist. I have an account, but I've never used it. I don't find it beneficial to my work. I have used PlantNet on occasion for identification of plants, so I'm a little unfamiliar with exactly how iNaturalist works. And whether or not it would work with lichen, it probably wouldn't. There might be some species that you can identify from a photograph, using an algorithm, but lichen, identification of lichen is tricky. Normally, often in order to identify a lichen, you have to get in close with a hand lens or put it under a microscope.
Mm-hmm. Okay, given the amount of clearing and land development in your study and working area, what do you see going on for land conservation establishment in that area?
Land conservation establishment, like the establishment of new areas, I'm assuming they're referring to. Well, currently the province is in the process of setting aside quite a few hectares of land as protected natural areas that are part of the Target 1 that I mentioned. There's also potential for indigenous protected areas.
Right. Another question that kind of ties in with that from Hank. He's saying, thank you for this truly illuminating presentation. Has the First Nation presented your findings to provincial forestry officials in an effort to influence forestry policy?
I have been in the field on a couple of occasions with folks, a few occasions with folks from the DNR, and they're increasingly aware of the work that I'm doing. So I'd like to believe it's having some impact, and I'm pretty sure that it will have more of an impact in the coming years if I'm able to continue the work. It's the quality of the work or the results of the work being recognized, that I'm documenting things that hadn't been noted before. So I think good things will come.
Awesome. So if nobody else has any questions, I'm going to just pass it over to Mary. Thanks.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you, Todd, for a great presentation. But also thank you for sharing your images and your experiences going through some really important habitat. And looking at those images, you can only imagine what's happening beneath the soil and surrounding water areas. So I think the information that you're gathering and sharing is really going to be beneficial in the conservation process and to help preserve the biodiversity in the area. And so I'd really like to thank you for a wonderful presentation, and good luck with this continuing work. Thanks, Todd.